Over a number of years, there have been many champions in the boxing world who have put on incredible fights for boxing fans. The most striking and spectacular end to any battle is to knock out your opponent. In this video, the world of boxing has prepared for you a rating of the top 10 best knockout fighters in heavyweight history. Before watching, please press the like button under the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Now, let's take a look at some of the most incredible fighters in the history of heavyweight boxing. Joe Frazier, 1970 to 1973 world champion. The holder of one of the strongest left hooks in the history of boxing. But at the same time, and maybe because of this, he was to a certain extent a one-armed boxer. He won the Olympics back in 1964, then went into the pros and was undefeated for a long time. He was the first to defeat Muhammad Ali in the so-called match of the century. He was at his peak, the top, then his career went down. All the other main fights in his life, Frazier lost. Twice to George Foreman and twice to his eternal rival Muhammad Ali. His last fight with Ali is considered by many to be one of the best fights in the history of heavyweight boxing. But it was not Frazier who won. Joe boxed in the golden age of the heavyweights, when the division was full of impressive competition. And he was not only known for boxing, he was one of the most colorful characters of the time, unfortunately having both personal and business problems outside of the ring, holding him back from further greatness. Sonny Liston, 1962 to 1964 world champion. As a champion, Sonny was one of the most unpopular. Liston was a classic bad guy, and not all embarrassed by this fact. Bad guys didn't come into fashion until about 25 years later, but Liston was ahead of his time. Liston not only had connections with the mafia, but was its representative in the ring. However, this does not detract from his boxing merits. Sonny had in his arsenal a simply deadly left jab, which could easily end a fight by knockout. His physical strength at the time transcended all others. He was perfectly coordinated despite his size. However, his main weapon was his gaze, which terrified and weakened his opponents. Liston became the champion by destroying Floyd Patterson in one round. Then there was a rematch with the same result, a knockout in the first round. In 1964, he defended his title against a young Cassius Clay. Liston was the clear favorite. However, he was defeated, causing a huge sensation. A rematch was appointed, in which Clay, the new champion, knocked out Sonny in the first round. This ended the tale for Liston, and reality turned out to be very gloomy. Although partially successful, Liston never again returned to his previous level, and was found dead in his house in December of 1970. Rocky Marciano, 1952 to 1955 world champion. The only one of the great champions who never suffered a single defeat in his professional career. When weighing his boxing characteristics, Marciano is the weakest of the top 10, and this is a paradox. His main advantage was his unbending character. Even before becoming a champion, he defeated the legendary but older Joe Louis. After becoming a champion, he defended his title 6 times. However, one has to admit that the level of opposition in those years was not that high. Marciano left the ring at the zenith of his fame. Being an Italian, he had strong ties to the Italian mafia in America, which did not affect his popularity among the public. To criticize Rocky was considered bad form. After all, he was a national champion. He was wildly popular in life, and his tragic death seemed to capture the image of a young and invincible champion in the minds of boxing fans for many years. Jack Johnson, 1908 to 1915 world champion. Jack Johnson ruled in the heavyweights at the beginning of the last century. At the time, the title of world boxing champion was not associated with anyone of a dark skin color. Johnson was the one who literally broke through the color barrier. But he was an innovator in many other ways as well. In addition to becoming the first black heavyweight champion of the world, Johnson was the first to understand that you can make money on the image of an anti-hero, and sometimes even more. His case was just that. Jack took full advantage of this. As a showman, Johnson was far ahead of his time. As for boxing, he was not like many of his contemporaries. He successfully applied the tactics of the aggressive second number. He called the opponent to the attack, while he intercepted in the return or counter form. He was a master of combined defense, saying, "I just felt the distance with my skin." Johnson possessed phenomenal speed and a monstrous striking power. His fight against Jim Jeffries will go down in history forever as one of the most brutal beatings. Johnson savored every hit. Jack's duel against Jess Willard, in which he was knocked out, will also go down in history as one of the most controversial knockouts. With age, Johnson began to be defeated by stronger opponents. He spent his whole life in a frantic pace. That ended quickly with a car crash in June 1946. Larry Holmes, 1978 to 1985 World Champion. Larry was the world champion after Muhammad Ali, becoming the last shard of a great era. The task of replacing Ali is not easy, but Holmes is not an ordinary guy. He did not try to be like Ali. He was himself. That is, he was Ali's opposite. Larry did not care about the love of the fans. He did not care about the titles. Most of all, he was worried about money, or rather, the amount. Therefore, he deliberately sought contacts with Don King and became one of the few who did not get victimized by the Don. In his business acumen, his peers were few. For a long time, there were no equals in the ring either. He beat all the strongest fighters of the late 70s and early 80s, including Ken Norton, Jerry Cooney, and Muhammad Ali, or rather what was left of Muhammad at the time. As a boxer, he was the manifestation of universalism. He had no pronounced weaknesses or particular strengths. In the ring, he knew how to do everything from any distance. It was the judges who finished his victorious career, condemning him twice in battles against Michael Spinks. At the time, the calculating Holmes was tiring of the ring. He was aware of his advancing years, therefore Larry decided to leave. However, he returned to the ring 2 years later to fight with the young Mike Tyson, and this decision was criticized as senility because Mike simply destroyed him, and Larry looked terrible in the battle. But this was not enough for Holmes. He continued to box. This madness lasted for more than 10 years. Most likely for Larry, it was done in the name of money. The key word for him had always been earnings. George Foreman, a world champion from 1973 to 1974, and again from 1994 to 1995. The details of Foreman's sports career tell a tale of a unique boxer who holds a record that has not yet been broken. He possessed huge physical strength, a monstrous right-hand blow, and good technique. But his main feature is the metamorphosis that occurred with him, or rather inside of him. It divided his life into before and after. Having won the 1968 Olympic Games, Foreman began to make some terrible decisions by immediately going into the professionals. Over time, he earned the glory of the most formidable fighter of his time. No one has inflicted such fear on opponents since the time of Sonny Liston. In his first champion fight, he literally swept away from the ring Joe Frazier, who had defeated Muhammad Ali and was considered by many to be invincible. Then it seemed that Foreman would be on the throne for as long as he wished. However, Foreman's championship lasted a little over a year and a half. In 1974, in the battle against Ali, Foreman was defeated, from which he did not recover immediately. The defeat so shocked Foreman that even after several victories, he, being one step away from a rematch with Muhammad, lost in points to technical fighter Jimmy Young. After that, he said goodbye to the ring for a long 10 years, which seems like forever in boxing. What then happened in his soul is only known to God and Foreman himself. George threw all the televisions out of the house, saying that they prevented him from thinking. He became a believer, and not just a believer, but a preacher. What made him subsequently return to the ring? A need, the call of the heart, or both? In the end, we will never know. But he did return. Foreman's immense popularity among middle-aged fans gave him a chance at title fights. Having steadfastly suffered first setbacks in the battles against Evander Holyfield and Tommy Morrison, Foreman used his chance in the fight against Michael Moorer, knocking him out in the 10th round with a blow to the right. It was 1994, and Foreman was then 2 months from turning 46 years old. After that, George most likely lost the motivation that had forced him back into the ring. Moreover, he perfectly understood the alignment of forces at the time. And after several unconvincing battles, Foreman left the ring again. By that time, he was already not only a millionaire, but also a favorite of millions of Americans. Nearly all of these Americans had bought his famous George Foreman grills, making him even richer. George Foreman is a classic example of someone who created his own destiny, a man who made himself. He showed the whole world that nothing is impossible. He occupies his own unique place in history of boxing, and he is 5th in this rating.
Thank you very much. I wouldn't have wanted to do it with anyone better than Larry Merchant. You're a wonderful man. God bless you. And remember, the George Foreman lean, mean, fat reducing grilling machine. No home should be without this thing. God bless you. Go get one.
Mike Tyson, world champion from 1986 to 1990, and again from 1995 to 1996. If George Foreman is a story about one man, then Tyson is an era in the world of boxing, and a phenomenon with a cult following of global proportions. This era lasted almost 20 years. He was not eclipsed even by those who defeated him. His era continued when Tyson was not a champion and was only a shadow of himself in boxing terms. Tyson skipped the 1984 Olympics. Neither he nor his coach father, Cus D'Amato, was mistaken. They appreciated their strength and knew perfectly well what they were ready for. Tyson was incredibly gifted physically. He had excellent speed and just a killer blow from either hand. But his main thing was his unique striking technique and defense, which was ideally suited to his bodily proportions. His main drawback, however, was his character, which later caused him much trouble. But at first, everything turned out just fantastic. In 1986, when Mike was only 20 years old, he became the youngest champion in heavyweight history. At this point, he was only a year and a half into his professional career, and he experienced one of the fastest takeoffs in boxing history, a feat unlikely to be repeated anytime in the near future. If Tyson's takeoff to the top was the fastest, then his eventual downfall was the longest. His pinnacle was a victory over Michael Spinks by knockout in the first round. At that time, it was believed that Spinks was the only one who could compete with Tyson. Yet Mike just devastated him in the ring, breaking Spinks and ending his career. At the time, it seemed to many that a person capable of defeating Tyson had not yet been born. Therefore, his defeat at the hands of James Douglas in 1990 became one of the biggest sensations in the history of boxing. Nevertheless, now that the time had passed and the passions around Tyson had subsided, you can look at the situation more soberly. At the time, Mike was not surrounded by a single person that was loyal to him, and under the strict guidance of Don King, Tyson collapsed as a person. As a boxer, he had already been degrading for about 2 years. His whole life by that time was a series of various scandals, incidents, and court appearances.
Then I got caught up with this other piece of shit, Don King, who's just a wretched, slimy, reptilian motherfucker, right? This is supposed to be my brother, my black brother, right? He's just a bad man. He's a real bad man. He abused you, he would throw you, he would kill his mother for $1. He's ruthless, he's deplorable. He doesn't know how to love anybody. That's just the way he is.
The greatest country in the world, man. This is America, baby.
As a boxer, he had already been degrading for about 2 years. His whole life by that time was a series of various scandals, incidents, and court appearances. Boxing ceased to be the main focus of his life. He lived off his reputation, which allowed him to be among the strongest for more than 10 years. How it all ended, everybody knows. The Tyson era ended with Lennox Lewis in 2002, knocking out Iron Mike in round 8. Many boxers, the greatest ones included, cannot maintain their peak performance forever. The reasons for this can vary greatly, and Tyson had his own. Having earned more than $12 million over his career, Tyson still went bankrupt, showing a complete inability to conduct his own business affairs. It was this need for money that made Mike dishonor his reputation twice near the end of his career, forcing him into the ring when he clearly had no desire to box. This detracted somewhat from his fame. But whatever Tyson's financial situation, he will forever remain an era in the world of boxing. And Tyson's main asset, his name, will always provide Mike with more than enough. Joe Louis, world champion 1937 to 1949. Like Tyson, Joe Louis represented an era in boxing. And if the Tyson era was marked not only by his fights, but also by the courts, scandals, weddings, divorces, and all the other troubles that made Iron Mike even more famous, then the era of Louis is the diary of a military commander, in which his battles, victories, conquests, and defeats are recorded. Joe Louis has dominated the ring longer than anyone else. His reign lasted 11 years in a row and included 25 title defenses. And if it were not for the war, there more than likely would have been 30 of them. Louis had decent speed, excellent technique, a cannon strike, and a terrific ability to take a hit and recover. But his main trump card was his accuracy. No one could compare with him in this. His blows flew along different trajectories, but always landed in one place. Among his shortcomings can be mentioned a weaker defense and a loss in the first match against Max Schmeling. Joe Louis became the champion when black boxers were perceived exclusively through the prism of Jack Johnson. But Louis was different. He was not a rebel. He was a noble warrior, and at the time did not dispute the dominance of the white boxers. However, Louis was not pretentious. He was simply himself. Therefore, the white audience accepted him very easily. It was Louis pushing the boundaries of race in America as far as possible for the time. Everyone loved and respected him. But even with all of his athletic and human virtues and achievements, Joe turned out to be a bad businessman. Having earned more than $1 million, he ended up financially ruined. Therefore, he was among those boxers who were forced to fight for money beyond their time. It was this need for money that made him return to the ring in 1950 to fight with Ezzard Charles and lose on points. His career finally ended with a hard knockout in the 8th round from Rocky Marciano. This happened on October 26, 1951. That day ended the era of Joe Louis, who left a huge mark in boxing history. Muhammad Ali, world champion 1964 to 1967 and 1974 to 1978. If the always honest Joe Louis was himself, and for that he was loved, then Muhammad Ali was only partly himself. What is more, this part was constantly changing, because Ali was a natural-born showman. Ali's entire career was a struggle, the struggle for one's place in the sun, for one's principle and beliefs, and for one's place in history. If Louis reconciled white and black, then Ali equalized them. He broke through the walls that stood for centuries. The ring for Ali was not only a place of earnings and sports achievements. For him, the ring was an acting scene and a battlefield at the same time.
I have fixed up the round that Joe Frazier will go down.
Here he fought for his views, spoke with strong words, and defended his rights and beliefs. He attached a social, religious, or simply scandalous character to all his big fights, but most often, all three at once. Ali was an innovator in the ring, and so much so that his contemporaries did not immediately understand him. His leg work was his most effective means of attack and defense, but at first it caused only bewilderment in his opponents. His manual speed and accuracy were simply amazing, which more than compensated for his somewhat less powerful strikes. Not that his blows were weak, but many in his time could hit harder. His spirit of a real warrior was not also immediately apparent. But Ali's main trump card was a sense of distance, which he developed almost to perfection. He felt the distance with his skin. His drawback was that Ali, for the sake of bravado, often missed critical punches, which, in the end, greatly complicated his life after the ring. Winning the 1960 Olympics in light heavyweight, Ali immediately became a professional. Ali's career description is material for an entire book. We can only say that he fought during a time when there was the greatest competition in the heavyweight division. He battled for 2 fights with Sonny Liston, 3 with Joe Frazier, and 1 with George Foreman and Larry Holmes, and another 3 with Ken Norton. But there were also battles with Henry Cooper, Floyd Patterson, Joe Bugner, George Chuvalo, and others. All of this is one career that has become an era. However, no matter how great Muhammad Ali was, he overextended his career. While finances drove Joe Louis and Mike Tyson into the ring, Ali returned there for fame and attention. In the end, his return only added fame to those who beat him, such as Larry Holmes and Trevor Burbank. If it wasn't for this less than ideal end to his career, he would be the first in this ranking. But because of it, he is second. Lennox Lewis, world champion 1993 to 1994, 1997 to 2001, and 2001 to 2003. Lewis is number 1 in our ranking. We understand perfectly well that many, even most, may think differently. However, one can debate against arguments, but it is much harder to argue against facts. Lewis has not lost a single mega fight in his career, starting from winning the 1988 Olympic Games final over Riddick Bowe and ending with his last victorious battle against Vitaly Klitschko. Let me remind you that also in this list of his victims were such great names as Holyfield, Tyson, Tua, Grant, Golota, Ruddock, Morrison, Mercer, Briggs, Tucker, and others. All of them, except Tyson, though he also beat Tyson, were in great shape. The competition was very high then. His only 2 defeats were the result of insufficient motivation and underestimation of the enemy. Lewis's managers only functioned as assistants, whom he controlled. He was never threatened with bankruptcy and ruin. Everything he earned by hard work in the ring was saved and saw increase. He is one of the few who left the ring in time, undefeated and in the rank of champion. In addition, comparing him with other champions in this list, we would favor him to win in a hypothetical battle with any of them. Lewis was unique. Being a Jamaican, he won the Olympic Games under the flag of Canada, and in the professional ring performed under the flag of the United Kingdom. A true cosmopolitan, few people loved him, but he made everyone respect him. He always emphasized independence, mixed with a little arrogance, and was not concerned with public opinion. Often the public was opposed to him, but Lewis was indifferent. Lennox always knew his worth, and for the vast majority of boxing fans and analysts, his era began in the sunset of the Tyson era. For Lewis himself, his time began in 1993 when he became the world champion. Lewis is an almost perfect heavyweight. Everything was for him: impressive dimensions, a killer blow with either hand, and a reliable defense. Lennox was fast and flexible, perfectly knowing how to vary the pace of the battle, forcing the enemy by surprise with explosive actions. The richest technical and tactical base allowed him to be a true universal in the ring. His right cross and uppercut are the material of examples for study. All this is Lewis, the ability to act at any distance and at the same time be both an aggressor and a tactician, equally at home, attacking or defending. This is Lewis, and so he is listed as number 1. Please do not forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any new episodes about the boxing legends of the past. See you next time.